The first sign of trouble was a cough. A single, metallic hack from the engine that made the whole chassis of my decade-old sedan shudder. I told myself it was nothing, just a hiccup from the cheap gas I'd put in a few towns back. But then came another, a sputtering gasp that vibrated up through the gas pedal and into the sole of my foot. The green hills flanking the Tulane highway seemed to lean in, listening. The sky, a bruised purple-gray, pressed down. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was in the middle of nowhere, a place defined only by the absence of other places, and my car was dying. It gave one last, pathetic wheeze, and then coasted into silence. The only sound was the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine and the whisper of wind through the tall, dry grass lining the road. I was well and truly stranded. For a moment, I just sat there, head resting against the steering wheel, the smell of vinyl and stale air conditioning filling my lungs. This was it. This was the grand adventure. This was me, Leo, finally breaking free from the suffocating routine of my life in the city, the soul-crushing data entry job, the apartment that echoed with my own loneliness. I had pictured myself finding some quaint coastal town or a vibrant, artistic community in the mountains. I had not pictured this. A broken-down car on a desolate stretch of asphalt with a storm threatening to break overhead. My phone, predictably, had no signal. I got out of the car and looked in both directions. Nothing. Just the endless ribbon of road disappearing into the horizon. I popped the hood for show, staring at the greasy, complicated heart of the machine with the practiced cluelessness of a man who'd only ever put fluid in one of its many receptacles. It was hopeless. A fat drop of rain hit my cheek, then another. With a sigh that felt like it came from the very bottom of my weary soul, I grabbed my backpack from the passenger seat, locked the car that was now just a very large paperweight, and started walking. The road sign I'd passed a few minutes before had said Havenwood. 3 miles, it felt like a cruel joke. Havenwood. It sounded like a place that didn't exist, a name dreamed up for a fantasy novel. But it was my only hope. The rain started in earnest, a steady, determined drizzle that quickly soaked through my thin jacket. Each step was a squelch. My world narrowed to the gray road, the green blur of the trees, and the sound of my own breathing. After what felt like an eternity, a shape began to resolve itself through the misty rain. A building, low and long, with a neon sign that sputtered bravely against the gloom. The Pine Crest Motel, it read, but the P was dark, so it looked more like the Piney Crest Motel below it, in angry red letters, a single, damning word, vacancy. Except the NO in front of it was lit up, stark and absolute. My heart sank. Of course it was full. Still, I had to try. I trudged across the gravel parking lot, my shoes crunching with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet downpour. The office was a small, attached building with a large picture window. Inside, it was dark. I tried the door. Locked. I knocked, the sound flat and pathetic against the wood. I waited, rain dripping from my hair into my eyes. Nothing. I was about to turn away, to resign myself to sleeping in a ditch or trying to break back into my own useless car, when a light flickered on in a small house set back behind the motel. A moment later, the front door of the house opened, and a man stepped out onto the covered porch. He was a silhouette against the warm light spilling from inside, tall and broad-shouldered. He pulled the door shut behind him and walked towards me, his boots making a solid, unhurried sound on the wet gravel. He wasn't running, despite the rain. He moved with a kind of deliberate economy, as if the world would wait for him. As he got closer, his features came into focus. He was probably in his late 30s, a few years older than me. His face was all strong lines and angles, a firm jaw dusted with dark stubble, a straight nose. His hair was dark and damp from the rain, clinging to his forehead. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a clear, steady gray, the color of the stormy sky, and they took me in with an unnerving, unreadable calm. He wore a simple gray Henley that stretched across a solid chest and worn jeans that looked like they'd seen years of hard work. He stopped a few feet from me, wiping a hand on his thigh. He smelled faintly of sawdust and rain. "Can I help you?" His voice was low and gravelly, a rumble that seemed to fit him perfectly. It wasn't unkind, just direct. I started, my own voice sounding thin and reedy by comparison. I cleared my throat. "I saw your sign. The no vacancy one. I know you're full, but my car broke down a few miles back. The storm. I just thought, maybe you had a cancellation. Or a broom closet. Anything. I tried for a self-deprecating smile, but my face felt stiff and cold. He looked past me, down the dark, empty road, then back at me. His gaze lingered for a moment, taking in my soaked clothes, my dripping hair, the desperation I was sure was written all over my face. He didn't say anything. The silence stretched, filled only by the drumming of the rain on the office roof. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, every one of my foolish life choices laid bare for his inspection. He was judging my entire existence in that quiet moment. I was sure of it. "Sign's right," he said finally, his voice still that low, even rumble. "Every room's booked. Logging crews in town for the week, right?" Of course, my shoulders slumped. "Sorry to bother you." I turned to leave, the prospect of the cold, wet road stretching out before me once more. My grand escape had lasted less than a day. "Hold on," I stopped, turning back. He was still watching me with that same steady, unnerving gaze. He scrubbed a hand over his jaw, the sound rough against the stubble. He looked at his house, then back at me. It was the first time I'd seen a flicker of something other than placid neutrality in his expression. Indecision, maybe. "The storm's getting worse," he stated, a fact that needed no stating. "You can't stay out in this." Another pause. He seemed to be having an internal debate. I held my breath. "I've got a spare room." "In the house." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "What? My house?" he said, jerking his chin towards the building he'd just come from. "Got a guest room. It's not a motel room, but it's dry. And it has a bed." The offer hung in the air between us, a shocking, unexpected kindness. A part of me, the city part, the part that had been taught to be suspicious of everyone and everything, screamed no. Don't go into a stranger's house in the middle of nowhere. It's the beginning of a horror movie. But the other part of me, the cold, wet, and utterly exhausted part, was overwhelmed with a profound sense of relief. I couldn't ask you to do that," I stammered, even as my whole body yearned to say yes. "You're not asking. I'm offering," he corrected me, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's that or the porch. Your choice." He wasn't smiling, but there was a faint quirk at the corner of his mouth, a hint of something that might have been amusement. "The room," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "The room would be great. Thank you. I can pay you, of course. We'll figure that out later," he said, already turning back towards the house. "Come on. Get out of the rain." I followed him, my squelching footsteps a pathetic counterpoint to his solid, confident stride. He held the door open for me, and I ducked inside, bringing a gust of wind and a puddle of rainwater in with me. The warmth of the house enveloped me immediately, a comforting blanket of heat and the scent of brewing coffee and old wood. He shut the door, and the roar of the storm was instantly muted, reduced to a muffled drumming against the windows. The world outside ceased to exist. It was just this house, just this man, just us. My heart picked up its pace for a reason that had nothing to do with the cold. "I'm Elias," he said, turning to face me in the warm light of the living room. "Leo," I replied, extending a cold, damp hand. He took it. His hand was large and warm and rough with calluses. It enveloped mine completely. His grip was firm, brief, and yet it sent a jolt of electricity straight up my arm. He let go, but I could still feel the phantom pressure, the surprising heat of his skin against mine. "Go on, get those wet things off," he said, gesturing to my soaked jacket and shoes. "There's a hook by the door. I'll get you a towel." I did as I was told, fumbling with the zipper of my jacket. I felt clumsy and out of place in his home. It was a reflection of him, I realized. Simple, functional, and comfortable in its own skin. There was a large stone fireplace, a couple of worn leather armchairs, and shelves overflowing with books. Not paperbacks, but sturdy hardcovers. History, biographies, poetry. A thick wool blanket was folded neatly over the arm of one of the chairs. It was a space that felt lived in, solid, and safe. Elias returned from a hallway, a thick, clean towel in his hand. "Bathrooms down the hall. First door on the left if you want to dry off properly. Your room is the next one down, thank you," I said again, feeling inadequate. The words felt too small for the generosity he was showing me. I took the towel, and our fingers brushed. Another spark. I pulled my hand back faster than I should have. I saw his eyes flicker down to my hand, then back up to my face. A question in them. I looked away, my face suddenly hot. This is ridiculous, I told myself. He's just a nice guy, a kind stranger. But my body wasn't listening. It had been a long, long time since I'd been this close to a man who radiated such quiet, masculine confidence. A long time since a simple touch had felt like anything at all. I spent the next hour under the pretense of settling in. The guest room was as simple and clean as the rest of the house. A sturdy wooden bed frame, a patchwork quilt, a single window looking out at the rain-streaked darkness. I took a hot shower that washed away the chill of the road, but did little to calm the frantic energy buzzing under my skin. I changed into the only dry clothes I had in my backpack, a pair of sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. When I emerged, the smell of coffee was stronger. I found Elias in the kitchen, a space that was clearly the heart of the house. He was standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 heavy ceramic mugs. He moved with that same unhurried grace, every action efficient and sure. He hadn't changed, but he looked even more solid, more real, in the warm light of his own kitchen. The sleeves of his Henley were pushed up to his elbows, revealing strong, corded forearms dusted with dark hair. I watched the muscles in his back shift under the fabric as he reached for a carton of milk in the fridge. My mind, which had been blissfully quiet on the long, lonely drive, was now a hive of activity. It was analyzing everything. The way he stood, balanced and grounded. The low timbre of his voice. The calluses on his hands that spoke of a life of physical work, a life so different from my own screen and keyboard existence. I was an observer by nature, a professional wallflower, and Elias was the most compelling thing I'd had to observe in years. He turned and saw me hovering in the doorway. "Coffee?" he asked, as if it weren't already poured. "Please," I said, my voice a little hoarse. I stepped into the kitchen, feeling like an intruder in this domestic scene. He pushed one of the mugs across the wooden countertop towards me. "Milk and sugar are there, black is fine," I said, wrapping my cold hands around the warm ceramic. The heat seeped into my palms, a small comfort. We stood in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. It wasn't an awkward silence, not really. It was full. Waited. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the steady drumming of the rain, the sound of his breathing. I tried to decipher the expression on his face, but it was like trying to read a weathered stone. His features were calm, his gray eyes focused on something out the kitchen window, though there was nothing to see but darkness and rain. Was he regretting his offer? Was he wondering what kind of weirdo he'd just let into his house? "So," he said, his voice startling me out of my internal spiral. He turned his gaze from the window to me. It was like a physical touch. "What's a guy like you doing broken down in the middle of my county?" The question was casual, but his eyes were sharp, perceptive. He wasn't just making small talk. He was curious. "I quit my job," I admitted, the words tasting strange and new on my tongue. "Decided to just drive. See where the road took me." It sounded so flimsy, so childish, when I said it out loud to him. "Running from something, or to something?" he asked. There it was. The directness that seemed to be his default setting. He cut right through the bullshit. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "I'm not sure there's a difference." The honesty surprised me. I wasn't used to being honest, not even with myself. He considered that for a moment, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't offer any platitudes or easy answers. He just nodded, a small, accepting gesture. "Sometimes there isn't," he agreed. That small validation, that simple agreement, did more to put me at ease than anything else he could have said. He wasn't judging my pathetic little quarter-life crisis. He was just accepting it. We talked for a while after that. He asked about my job, and I described the gray cubicle, the flickering fluorescent lights, the endless spreadsheets. He listened patiently, his steady gaze never leaving my face. In turn, I learned that he'd inherited the motel from his parents, that he'd grown up here, left for a few years to see the world, and then come back. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Why come back here after seeing everything else?" He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. The movement made the muscles in his arms and shoulders bunch, and I had to force myself to keep my eyes on his face. "The world is loud," he said simply. "I like the quiet," and I understood. I, who had fled the city because of its crushing, lonely noise, understood completely. We were opposites in so many ways. Him, all solid earth and quiet confidence. Me, a bundle of nervous energy and city-bred anxiety. But in that, we were the same. We were both seeking a certain kind of quiet. As we were talking, the lights flickered. Once, twice. And then, with a collective sigh from the refrigerator, they went out. We were plunged into an absolute, profound darkness. Well, Elias's voice came out of the black, calm and unbothered. Guess the storm finally won. The darkness changed the texture of the air. It felt thicker, more intimate. The sounds of the storm outside seemed to grow louder, rushing in to fill the void left by the electric hum of the house. I could hear Elias moving, the soft scuff of his boots on the floor. I could hear my own heart, a frantic, stupid drum against my ribs. "Stay put," he said. "I know where the candles are." I heard a drawer slide open, the rustle of a box. A moment later, a match scraped, and a small, brave flame bloomed in the darkness. Elias's face was illuminated from below, all sharp shadows and warm, golden light. He looked like a figure from an old painting. He lit a thick candle on the counter, and the kitchen was filled with a soft, flickering glow. "Better," he said, his eyes finding mine in the gloom. They seemed darker, deeper in the candlelight. The power outage felt like a line being drawn. Everything before it was the normal world. Everything after was something else entirely. We were cut off, isolated in this little bubble of light and warmth, surrounded by the howling storm. The forced proximity, the shared vulnerability, it was stripping away the layers of polite distance between us. "I should have a gas stove in the back shed," he mused, more to himself than to me. "We can at least make some real food." "You hungry?" I realized I was starving. "Yeah," I said. "I am, all right," he said, a new energy in his voice. He seemed to thrive on this kind of thing, on practical problems that needed solving. "You grab that candle. I'll need a hand." We spent the next hour engaged in a strange, intimate dance. I held the candle while he rummaged through a cluttered back porch, his broad back to me as he searched. He found the small camping stove and a can of propane. Back in the kitchen, we worked together in the small circle of light. I chopped vegetables with a knife that felt heavy and purposeful in my hand, while he opened cans of beans and tomatoes. He'd brush against me as he reached for something, a fleeting contact of his arm against mine, a light touch of his hip against my side. Each time, my skin would prickle, my breath catching in my throat. He never seemed to notice. Or if he did, he gave no sign. He cooked, stirring the contents of a pot with a wooden spoon. I just watched him. The candlelight carved his face into a mask of concentration. The silence was comfortable, filled with the small, domestic sounds of our task. The chop of the knife, the clatter of cans, the soft hiss of the gas stove. "It's not much," he said, ladling a thick, fragrant chili into 2 bowls. "But it's hot." We ate at the small kitchen table, the single candle between us making our shadows dance on the walls. The chili was incredible, rich and spicy, and deeply comforting. It warmed me from the inside out. "This is amazing," I said, my mouth full. He gave a small, pleased shrug. "Can't let a guest starve." The storm raged outside, a wild, untamed thing. But in here, in this small, quiet space, I felt safer than I had in years. The conversation flowed more easily now, lubricated by the food and the strange intimacy of the blackout. We talked about books we'd read, places we'd traveled. I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone, about my failed attempt at art school, about a relationship that had fizzled out into polite indifference, about the gnawing sense that I was just a spectator in my own life. He listened. He didn't offer advice or judgment. He just listened, his gray eyes fixed on me, and in their depths, I saw not pity, but understanding. And then, he did something that surprised me. He shared something of his own. "I was married once," he said, his voice quiet, his gaze dropping to the bowl in his hands. "To my high school sweetheart. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple." He paused, swirling the spoon in his chili. "We weren't. We were just performing, playing the parts everyone expected of us." It took me a long time to realize that being alone was better than being lonely with someone else. The confession was so simple, so raw. It hung in the air between us, a fragile, precious thing. He was showing me a piece of his own vulnerability, a crack in the stoic facade. He was telling me, in his own quiet way, that he understood loneliness. He understood the feeling of being out of place in your own life. "I get that," I whispered, my voice thick. being lonely with someone else. He looked up then, and his eyes met mine across the flickering flame. And in that moment, something shifted. The space between us, which had been filled with my nervous energy and his quiet observation, was now charged with a different kind of energy altogether. A current of recognition, of shared experience. The wall I kept so carefully constructed around myself, the one built of sarcasm and detachment, began to crumble. We finished eating in a comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding a warm presence between us. Elias took our bowls to the sink, and I stood to help, but he waved me off. "I've got it. You're the guest." I hovered nearby, unwilling to retreat to my room, not wanting this strange, fragile bubble to pop. He worked at the sink, his back to me. The simple, domestic act of him washing dishes by candlelight felt profound, significant. I watched the play of muscles in his shoulders, the sure, steady movements of his hands. I must have been staring, because he stopped, his hands still in the water, and slowly turned his head to look at me over his shoulder. The candlelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the question in his eyes. "What are you looking for, Leo?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. The question was a spear. It shot through all my defenses, all my internal chatter, and struck the very heart of me. He wasn't asking what I was looking at. He was asking what I was looking for. In his house. On this trip. In my life. And he was asking it as if he already suspected the answer. I am frozen. The air is thick, heavy. It's hard to breathe. My own thoughts are roaring in my ears. But his question cuts through all of it. What am I looking for? I open my mouth, but no sound comes out. The truth is a hard, sharp thing lodged in my throat. I'm looking for a sign. For a reason. For a connection that doesn't feel like an obligation. I'm looking at him, and for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, I'm not just observing. I'm feeling. He turns fully from the sink, wiping his hands on a towel. He doesn't move closer, but his presence seems to fill the entire room, to suck all the air out. The single candle on the table throws our shadows, huge and distorted, against the kitchen cabinets. His shadow engulfs mine. "It gets lonely out here," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not a complaint. It's a statement of fact, an admission, an invitation. He's laying a card on the table, a piece of his own truth, and waiting to see if I'll match it. My heart is hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I can't speak. I can only look at him, my eyes tracing the lines of his face in the flickering light. The dark stubble on his jaw, the firm set of his mouth, the impossible calm in his gray eyes. I want to say something, anything. I want to say me too. I want to say, I haven't felt this not alone in years. But the words won't come. So I just give a small, jerky nod. It's all I can manage. A flicker of something crosses his face. Not disappointment. Understanding. He takes a step towards me. Then another. He stops when there's only a foot of space between us. I can feel the heat radiating from his body. I can smell the clean, masculine scent of his soap mixed with something that is just him. Earth and wood and quiet strength. "You're shivering," he says, his voice a low rumble that vibrates through my chest. I hadn't even realized it. It's not from cold. The room is warm. It's from everything. The tension, the fear, the want. He reaches out, not to touch me, but to the living room just beyond the kitchen. He grabs the thick wool blanket from the back of the armchair. He unfolds it and drapes it around my shoulders. The wool is heavy, warm, and smells faintly of him, of campfire smoke and cedar. His hands rest on my shoulders for a beat too long, his fingers firm, his palms radiating a searing heat through the fabric of my t-shirt and the blanket. My entire body goes rigid. I stop breathing. His hands linger there. He's not moving away. His face is so close now. I can see the flecks of a darker gray in his irises. I can see the slight parting of his lips. The air between us is electric, crackling with everything that has been building since I first saw him standing on his porch in the rain. This is the tipping point, the moment where the world tilts on its axis. Every nerve ending in my body is screaming. My carefully constructed walls are dust. There is only this man, this room, this storm, and the unbearable, exquisite tension coiling in my gut. "Leo," he says, and my name on his lips is a revelation. It sounds different. It sounds like it belongs there. And that's what breaks me. The sound of my own name, spoken with such quiet intensity. "I don't know what this is." I whisper, the words finally breaking free. My voice is wrecked, a raw, honest thing. His eyes search mine, deep and serious. A ghost of a smile touches his lips, a sad, knowing little curve. "I think you do," he says softly. And then he is moving. His hands slide from my shoulders up to my neck, his thumbs tracing the line of my jaw. The touch is feather-light, and yet it roots me to the spot. My heart is a frantic drum against my ribs. My mind is utterly, blissfully blank. There is no more analysis, no more overthinking. There is only this. Now, he is leaning in, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, to protest, to stop him. I can't. I want this more than I've wanted anything in a very, very long time. I lift my chin, a silent, answering signal. His lips meet mine. It's not a hard, demanding kiss. It's soft, questioning. It's the taste of coffee and something uniquely him. His lips are firm, dry, and they move against mine with a slow, deliberate pressure that makes my knees weak. One of his hands cradles the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair. The other rests on my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The rough pad of his thumb against my skin sends a shiver through my entire body. I kiss him back, tentatively at first, then with a dawning, desperate certainty. I bring my hands up, not knowing what to do with them, and finally rest them on his chest. I can feel the solid wall of muscle beneath his shirt, the steady, powerful beat of his heart. It's so much slower than my own frantic rhythm. It's an anchor. He deepens the kiss, a low sound rumbling in his chest. It's a kiss that speaks of loneliness and longing, of quiet nights and unspoken hopes. It's not rushed. It's not greedy. It's right. It feels like coming home to a place I've never been before. It feels like a lock finding its key. He pulls back just an inch. Our foreheads press together. We're both breathing heavily, our breath mingling in the small space between us. My eyes are closed. I don't want to open them. I want to stay in this moment forever. "Leo," he whispers again, his breath warm against my lips. I open my eyes. His are right there, dark and stormy in the candlelight, but the unreadable calm is gone. In its place is something raw and vulnerable and real. The same feeling that's churning inside me. Reciprocation. Without a word, he takes my hand, his calloused fingers lacing through my own. His grip is firm, possessive, a silent promise. He leads me from the kitchen, leaving the single candle to burn itself out on the table. He leads me down the dark hallway, not to my room, but to his. The world fell away after that. There was only the darkness of his room, the sound of the rain against the window pane, and the solid, comforting presence of him. There was the scratch of his stubble against my skin, the heat of his body next to mine, the weight of his arm draped over my waist. There were whispered words, fragmented confessions spoken into the dark. There was a slow, deliberate exploration, a mapping of bodies and a bearing of souls. It was sensual and tender and achingly intimate, a silent conversation that said all the things we hadn't been able to say with words. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel like an observer. I was a participant. I was here. I was real. I fell asleep tangled in his arms, the sound of his slow, steady breathing the most comforting sound I had ever heard. I woke to silence, a profound, absolute silence that was more jarring than the storm had been. The rain had stopped, and the space beside me in the bed was empty, cold. My eyes snapped open. Sunlight, bright and unforgiving, was streaming through a gap in the curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The power was back on. I could hear the faint, familiar hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. The house was back to normal, and I was alone in Elias's bed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I sat up, clutching the sheets to my chest. The room was just as I'd imagined it. Simple, masculine, tidy. A dark wood dresser, a stack of books on the nightstand, a framed photo of a mountain landscape on the wall. And it was empty. He was gone. My mind, a cruel and efficient machine, immediately started supplying the worst-case scenarios. He regretted it. He woke up, saw me in his bed, and fled. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness brought on by the storm and the darkness. He was a kind man who had taken pity on a stray, and things had gone too far. The morning light had revealed his mistake in horrifying clarity. I was a fool. A pathetic, lonely fool who had mistaken a moment of shared humanity for something more. My face burned with shame. I scrambled out of the bed, my clothes from the night before a pathetic heap on the floor. I pulled them on, the fabric feeling clammy and wrong. I had to get out of there. I couldn't face him. I couldn't bear to see the pity, or, worse, the polite dismissal in his eyes. I crept out of his room, every creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the quiet house. The living room was empty. The candle on the kitchen table was a melted puddle of wax. The dirty dishes were gone from the sink. The house was pristine, as if last night had never happened. As if I had never happened. My backpack was by the front door where I'd left it. My plan was simple. Slip out, walk back to my car, and call a tow truck. I would disappear from his life as quickly as I had appeared. He would be relieved. It would be a clean break. My hand was on the doorknob when I heard a sound from outside. The solid, rhythmic thwack of an axe splitting wood. I hesitated. I peered through the small window in the door. There he was, in the backyard, by a large woodpile, his back to me. He was wearing the same gray Henley, but the sleeves were rolled up high on his biceps. He swung the axe with an easy, powerful grace, splitting a log in two with a single, clean stroke. He bent, set another log on the block, and swung again. Thwack! The motion was hypnotic. Steady, strong, unhurried. He wasn't a man who was running from anything. I watched him for a long time, my hand still on the doorknob, my heart a confused, painful knot in my chest. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't avoiding me. He was just chopping wood, as if it were any other morning. As if he felt my gaze, he stopped. He set the axe down, resting its head on the chopping block, and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm. And then, slowly, he turned. He looked right at the house, right at the window where I was standing. He saw me. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. His expression was that same steady calm from the day before. He just looked at me for a long moment. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and turned back to his work. Thwack! I let go of the doorknob. My legs felt weak. What did that mean? Was it a dismissal? An acknowledgement? A good morning? My brain, my stupid, overthinking brain, was on fire again. I retreated from the door, my escape plan thwarted by a single, unreadable look. I couldn't just leave now. It would be cowardly. I had to face him. I made my way to the kitchen on autopilot and started making coffee, the simple, familiar task a small anchor in my sea of anxiety. I knew where he kept the filters, the coffee, the mugs. The domesticity of it felt both comforting and terrifyingly presumptuous. A few minutes later, the back door opened and he came in, bringing with him the crisp morning air and the scent of fresh-cut pine. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the sight of me in his kitchen, a fresh pot of coffee brewing. "Morning," he said. His voice was that same low, gravelly rumble. It held no trace of awkwardness or regret. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't meet his eyes. I busied myself with getting a mug from the cabinet, my hands shaking slightly. He walked over to the sink and washed his hands, the sound of the running water filling the silence. I braced myself for what was coming next. The apology. The last night was a mistake speech. The polite but firm request for me to leave. Instead, he dried his hands, turned, and leaned against the counter beside me. He was so close I could feel the warmth of his body again. I kept my eyes fixed on the coffee maker, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot. "Sleep okay?" he asked quietly. The simple, normal question threw me completely. I finally forced myself to look at him. His gray eyes were clear and direct. There was no pity in them, no regret, just a quiet, searching intensity. He was giving me an opening, a chance to say how I felt. I started, my throat tight. I slept better than I have in a long time. The admission was terrifying, but it was the truth. A small, slow smile touched his lips. It was the first real smile I'd seen from him, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines and making his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Good," he said. "Me too." And just like that, the panic began to recede. The knot in my chest loosened. He wasn't regretting it. He was okay. We were okay. He reached out, not with the fire of the night before, but with a quiet, deliberate tenderness. He took the mug from my trembling hand and set it on the counter. Then he took my hand in his. His palm was rough and warm against mine. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding my hand, his thumb stroking gently over my knuckles. It was a simple, grounding touch, a reassurance, a confirmation that last night was real and that it mattered. "The garage in town opens at 9, he said, his voice soft. My truck's running. I can give you a ride. Help you sort out the car. The mention of the car was a splash of cold water. Reality. The test. The thing that had brought me here was also the thing that would give me a way out. My car would be fixed. And then what? The reason for my presence in his house, in his life, would be gone. The thought sent a fresh wave of anxiety through me. I pulled my hand away, wrapping my arms around myself. Right. The car, he watched me, his smile fading, his expression turning serious again. He was so perceptive. He knew exactly what I was thinking. Leo, he said, his voice gentle but firm. We can deal with the car. And then we can figure out the rest. The word hung in the air between us, full of unspoken possibilities. He wasn't pushing me out. He was leaving the door open. The choice was mine. The ride into town was quiet. Elias drove his old, slightly battered pickup truck with the same steady confidence he did everything else. I stared out the passenger window at the rain-washed world. The trees were a vibrant, impossible green. The air smelled clean and new. It felt like the world had been scrubbed clean overnight. The town of Havenwood was small, just a single main street with a handful of storefronts, a grocery, a diner, a hardware store, and a two-bay garage. Elias seemed to know everyone. He nodded at a woman sweeping the sidewalk in front of the diner and exchanged a quiet word with the old man who ran the garage. I stood awkwardly to the side, feeling like an outsider, a temporary fixture in his very permanent world. The mechanic, a wiry man named Gus with oil-stained hands, promised he could take a look at my car that afternoon. Elias handed me his keys. Take the truck, he said. No sense in you being stuck here all day. I've got work to do back at the motel, are you sure? I'm sure, he said, his gaze steady. Come back when you're done. It wasn't a question. It was a simple statement of expectation. He expected me to come back. I spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. I drove his truck back to the motel, the cab filled with his scent, that same mix of sawdust and clean air. I parked it next to his house and just sat there for a long time, the engine ticking as it cooled. This was the moment of truth. My escape route was being repaired. Soon, I would have a functional car and a full tank of gas. I could get back on the road. I could continue my grand, aimless journey. I could drive until I hit the ocean, just like I'd vaguely planned. I could leave Havenwood and Elias behind, a strange, intense memory of a stormy night. It would be the safe thing to do, the easy thing to do, go back to being an observer. I thought about my empty apartment in the city, the silence that wasn't peaceful, but hollow, the feeling of watching my own life through a pane of glass. Then I thought about the feeling of Elias's hand in mine, the sound of his steady breathing in the dark, the way he looked at me, as if he were seeing the real me, the person buried under years of anxiety and disappointment, running from something or to something. He had asked me that, and I finally had the answer. All this time, I thought I was running from my old life. But maybe, just maybe, I had been running towards this, towards a quiet man in a quiet town who chopped his own wood and made me feel more seen than anyone ever had. Late that afternoon, Gus called. The car was fixed. A busted fuel pump. An easy fix. It was ready whenever I was. I took a deep breath. I got out of Elias's truck, walked into town, paid Gus, and got into my own car. The engine turned over with a smooth, healthy hum. It was ready. I was free to go. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands on the wheel, the same way I had when it had first broken down. But this time, the feeling was different. It wasn't despair. It was decision. Before me lay the road, the path back to the life I knew, the path to anywhere I wanted to go. Behind me, just a few miles back, was Elias. I thought about driving away. I pictured myself a week from now, a month from now, in some other town, in some other motel room, alone. The thought was unbearable. It was a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical ache. I put the car in gear. But I didn't turn towards the highway. I turned back towards the Pine Crest Motel. When I pulled into the gravel lot, he was there. He was sitting on the porch of his house, in one of two simple wooden chairs, a bottle of beer resting on his knee. He wasn't working. He was just sitting, waiting. He watched my car pull in, his expression unreadable from this distance. He didn't look surprised. He just looked steady. I parked the car, shut off the engine, and the silence rushed in. I got out, my legs feeling unsteady. I walked across the gravel towards him, the crunch of my shoes the only sound. He didn't get up. He just watched me approach, his gray eyes following my every step. I stopped at the bottom of his porch steps, looking up at him. I didn't know what to say. There were no words for the enormous, terrifying, hopeful thing that was blooming in my chest. "Car's fixed," I said, my voice sounding stupidly practical. "I see that," he replied, his voice a low, calm rumble. He took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes never leaving mine. The silence stretched again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was expectant. He was giving me the floor. He was letting me make the choice. I took a breath. I was wondering. I started, my voice shaking slightly. I was wondering if that spare room was available. For a little longer, Elias looked at me for a long, heart-stopping moment. And then he smiled. That same slow, genuine smile from the morning. It reached his eyes, filling them with a warm, soft light. He gestured with his beer bottle to the empty chair beside him. "The spare room is taken," he said. "But my room's free." Relief washed over me, so potent and overwhelming it almost buckled my knees. I let out a shaky laugh, a sound that was half sob. I climbed the steps and sank into the chair next to him. He reached over and handed me the other beer he'd apparently brought out for me. It was cold and wet in my hand. We didn't talk for a long time. We just sat there, side by side, watching the sun begin to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink and purple. The air grew cool, and the crickets started their evening song. It was a quiet, domestic, perfect moment. I looked at him, at his strong profile outlined against the vibrant sky. He was just a man, a motel owner in a small town. But he felt like an anchor, like a destination. He must have felt my gaze, because he turned his head and looked at me. The humor was gone from his eyes, replaced by that same deep, searching sincerity. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. "This isn't the life you were looking for?" "No," I said, and the truth of it resonated through my entire being. "It's not. It's better." I realized then that I hadn't been running from loneliness. I had been running from the emptiness of a life without connection. I had been driving aimlessly, hoping to stumble upon something that felt real. And in the most unexpected of places, on a stormy night in a town called Havenwood, I had stumbled right into it. Or maybe it had been waiting for me all along. He held my gaze for a moment longer, and then he nodded, a final, solid acceptance. He reached over, and his hand found mine, his rough, warm fingers lacing through my own. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His touch said everything. It said, "You're home. You're safe. You can stop running now." And as we sat there on his porch, hands clasped together, watching the last of the light fade from the sky, I finally felt quiet. Not the empty, hollow quiet of my apartment, but a deep, peaceful quiet in my soul. I wasn't an observer anymore. I was here, and I was finally, wonderfully home.